Uh, Mr. Secretary, I was part of an effort led by Senator Cruz and Senator Shaheen to impose sanctions to stop the building of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I have to admit, honestly, I was surprised at how unbelievably effective those sanctions were, and it stopped it. When you came before this committee about 5 months ago, I thought you were completely on board with the continued halting of the construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I have to admit, I'm shocked at now the fact that yesterday and today you are conceding the fact that it's going to get built. That would have been really nice to know 5 months ago. When did your thinking change on that?
At the time, the construction was already over 90% complete, yet the U.S. sanctions managed to bring it to a standstill. Johnson found that outcome surprising and encouraging, viewing it as a significant diplomatic success in countering Russian influence in Europe. However, when Secretary Blinken returned to testify before the committee months later, Johnson was stunned to hear that the administration now conceded the pipeline would ultimately be completed. This shift was more than just a change in policy. It was, to Johnson, a betrayal of prior commitments and a massive strategic failure. He pointedly asked why the administration had not made its change in thinking known earlier, especially when the committee had already been engaged on this issue months prior. Johnson argued that had the administration maintained the sanctions and pressure, the construction could have been stopped indefinitely, or at least delayed enough to weaken its geopolitical impact. Instead, the administration seemed resigned to its completion, despite previously opposing the project and acknowledging its risks. Johnson was especially alarmed by the implication that the U.S. was now relying on post-completion consequences as leverage. In other words, rather than preventing the pipeline's use as a political weapon by Russia, the administration appeared to be banking on vague, serious consequences. If Russia or Germany failed to uphold their side of future agreements, particularly concerning aid and support for Ukraine. For Johnson, this was a dangerously naive and reactive approach. He questioned what exactly these serious consequences would be and doubted their effectiveness once the pipeline was operational. He warned that this would give Russia increased leverage over European energy markets and weaken Western efforts to contain Russian aggression.
During the debate over the JCPOA, I offered an amendment to deem that a treaty. From my standpoint, that amendment should have passed 100-0. And had it passed 100-0, the JCPOA would have been, first, a far better agreement, and you wouldn't be in a position where from one administration to the next, a president can just cancel another executive agreement. So now you're engaged in further discussions with Iran. I have my doubts that you will end up with a better agreement. It's going to be worse. It'll embolden Iran. Don't you think, first of all, what justification is there, something that is that significant? Again, you take a look at the State Department's own manuals in terms of how it defines a treaty. I think it's quite clear that the original JCPOA was a treaty. Don't you think any agreement that you enter into with Iran should be deemed a treaty and should be ratified in the United States Senate?
Senators, you know, numerous arms control and nonproliferation agreements reached by the United States were not treaties. And there are benefits, you're right, to enshrining something in a treaty. There are also downsides in terms of some of the constraints that it actually would place on us.
Johnson emphasized that if the JCPOA had been ratified as a treaty, it would not have been so easily discarded by the Trump administration or now renegotiated under Biden. The agreement's instability has created a damaging precedent for American foreign policy, making it unreliable in the eyes of allies and adversaries alike. In response, Secretary Blinken attempted to justify the executive decision to enter into the agreement without seeking Senate ratification. He noted that numerous arms control and nonproliferation agreements in the past were not classified as treaties, and that there are practical reasons for that. One of his main arguments was that treaties, while formal and binding, also impose limitations on the United States that may hinder future diplomatic flexibility. In addition, he highlighted the complexity of the JCPOA as a multilateral agreement involving European allies, Russia, China, and Iran, making it difficult to fit within the strict constitutional framework of a traditional treaty. Despite this explanation, Johnson remained unconvinced. He stressed that the original deal lacked the structural strength necessary to endure changes in presidential leadership. He was also deeply skeptical of the Biden administration's ongoing efforts to re-engage with Iran. Johnson expressed doubt that the renewed negotiations would yield a better agreement than the first. In fact, he feared that any new deal might be even worse, one that could embolden Iran's hostile actions in the region and accelerate its pursuit of nuclear weapons under the guise of compliance.
Move on to another issue. So just respond to my oversight request. Finally, I want to talk about the budget as it relates to what the Biden administration is proposing to spend, I guess, to fix Central America. My first trip down to Central America, it was interesting what the presidents of those countries talked about in terms of problems they were dealing with. And first it was corruption and then impunity. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I understand corruption. I thought impunity, that's odd. I mean, what are you talking about there? And the fact of the matter is, they're talking about the fact that the drug cartels are untouchable. And by the way, the drug cartels in Central America, because through our drug interdiction efforts, we stopped, or we certainly redirect the flow through the Caribbean and up to Central America, destroying those societies in many respects. So I don't know what amount of money we can spend in Central America to really address the drug lords.
According to Johnson, this demand fuels the rise and dominance of powerful drug cartels in Central America, destabilizing entire societies and governments. He recalled his visit to the region, where leaders openly admitted that corruption and impunity, specifically the inability to prosecute drug cartels, were destroying their nations. These cartels operate with near total freedom, exerting economic and violent control over communities, and their power stems directly from the vast American drug market they supply. In Johnson's view, billions of dollars in aid to Central America will accomplish little if the deeper issue, the demand that keeps these criminal networks alive, is left unaddressed. He criticized the Biden administration's approach, which includes substantial funding intended to improve conditions in countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador in hopes of addressing the so-called push factors of migration. But Johnson was skeptical that this spending would yield any measurable or lasting results. He argued that no amount of foreign aid can overcome the sheer influence of drug cartels unless the U.S. itself takes responsibility for driving the demand that sustains them. Furthermore, Johnson took aim at the policy decisions made early in President Biden's term, such as ending the migrant protection protocols and halting construction of the border wall. These actions, in Johnson's assessment, signaled to would-be migrants that the U.S. border was once again open, triggering a surge in crossings. He accused the administration of creating the very crisis it now seeks to manage. According to Johnson, border security isn't just about physical infrastructure or immigration policy. It's deeply linked to the broader challenge of transnational crime fueled by the drug trade. When discussing Vice President Harris's statements about securing the border, Johnson dismissed them as empty rhetoric. He said he saw no real effort to curb illegal migration or confront the root causes of instability in the region. Instead, he emphasized that leaders in Central America are pleading with the United States to fix its own laws and reduce its drug consumption. These leaders, according to Johnson, are losing the very fabric of their societies as young people flee or fall victim to violence driven by terrorism.
There are a number of things that we need to do and do it at the same time. We have to have, and we're determined to have, and we will have a secure border. We have to have a rational immigration policies, and we have to deal with these drivers. And you know, I think it's fair to say that folks don't just wake up in the morning in Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador and say, "Boy, it would be a lot of fun to just give up everything I know, my family, my language, my culture, my community, take this incredibly hazardous journey, put myself in the hands of coyotes." Come to the United States, and the border's closed in any event, and that would be a great thing to do. We know that there are very, very serious things in their lives that are pushing them to take these chances, and these are things that I think we can help address. To your point, you're right. I think there are a number of factors involved: the corruption, lack of good governance, the impunity in terms of violence. The single biggest driver in most places, in my estimation, though, is fundamentally a lack of opportunity, a lack of a job, a lack of a paycheck, being able to put money on the table, feed their families. And this is a place where I think we can have a real impact, working primarily with the private sector, which has to be the engine for these kinds of investments. The government can help and be a catalyst. We need to see that. Of course, governments need to do the work to put in place some of the laws and structures that make private investment more possible. So we're working on that as well. But if, Senators, we don't also deal with these drivers, you know, it's just very hard to overcome the choice that people make to, you know, put their lives in someone else's hands to try to come here. We have to be able to do all of that, and that's where the President's plan go. I'd be happy when, you know, the time comes. This is not just throwing money at the problem. There are and will be serious metrics, serious oversight, serious benchmarks for what we're trying to accomplish. And last thing I'd mention on this, if I can, part of the challenge is that you have governments that we can't work effectively with because of corruption and because of gross mismanagement. Well, we'll be working with others, with the private sector, with civil society, with NGOs, with organizations that do this work, with local communities, as the case may be, to try to make sure that any funds that we ask our taxpayers to dedicate to this are used wisely and effectively and are not wasted. And I really welcome an opportunity to work with this committee on that.
Thank you.